Nice to see you again. Welcome back.
You look the same. You wore something different last year, but you look the same.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. 1 year I didn't age. Yay. So you're back to present Elliot Gould.
Yeah, I've known Elliot for 45 years when he was a young actor in New York. He and Streisand were married. And he was a good friend of my brother's. One of my brothers was, my late brother was a off-Broadway producer. He won the Obie Award, early John Guare plays, and I knew Elliot back then. And we stayed in touch. We talk baseball online sometimes, and he's really a great guy. He's had an interesting career, ups and downs and up again, and a long career. Don't forget, he's acted as far as back as the early 60s. And he was a child actor and a child model. And he went to professional children's school. He had I guess you'd call the word pushy stage mother, and survived that. And the Ocean's movies revived his career. Yes. And you know what was on TV last night? MASH, one of the great films of its type. There's no film at all like MASH. And I boned up on that. I know every line of MASH when I hear it becoming,
Yes.
And so it was great to see that again. So we'll talk about that on Saturday night.
And well, Mike Farrell was here earlier this week.
Right, and he was in it too.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah,
so he was in the show.
Yeah, on the TV show, right?
Yes,
yeah.
He was an amazing interview.
And that's interesting that the movie had this other life on TV, and also the character of Trapper John was played by several actors. Pernell Roberts played it in a TV series as well. So that's how this film has resonated, and it still has some relevance today. And Elliot came along at the right time. He was an anti-hero, and he broke all the rules. His characters did that. And so, he made a lot of films in the 70s. I remember every other week I'd be reviewing an Elliot Gould film. And in the long run, that may have hurt him, but he was able to overcome that, and he still works. He's in a crime series now with Liev Schreiber, and he's in those Ocean's movies, as I said. So it's a very interesting career.
Do you have a favorite movie of his or a favorite character? MASH, hands down.
I love MASH, and every time I see it, I don't see it that often, but it's one of the first films I reviewed professionally. It was 1970. I've been doing it a long time, and it just brought back a lot of memories. Away from the camera. Where was that? I remember where I saw it. I saw it, I think, in the old 20th Century Fox screening room in New York, which is long gone. It's now the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. So to say it was renovated is to put it mildly. And I've seen and reviewed 15,000 films since then. So it was like at the beginning of my career.
Is there a part of MASH that you love?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's when I don't know if you remember the movie, they're flown to Tokyo to operate on the wounded son of a congressman. And they brought their golf clubs, and they're dressed to play golf. And they come barging into the hospital, and the by-the-book woman says, "Who are you? You can't go in. You can't go in." And he says, "We are the pros from Dover, and we're going to cut this kid's chest open and be on the golf course before it gets dark." So I got out of our way. I love that. That's my favorite scene. I don't know why, but it just bespoke the attitude of the film.
And why do you think it's been around so long? I mean, what do you think?
Well, it's not shown often. It's on the Turner Classics.
It was on last night.
Yeah, it was on last night. And Robert Osborne, who he didn't do Ben Mankiewicz did the tag to it. Robert Osborne, who was the overall host, lives in my building. So sometimes we talk old movies. I kid him. I say, "How about a Faye Spain special?" I take a lot of B actresses. "How about a Lola Albright festival?" And he laughs. And sometimes you would see them in the lobby waiting for him. I became friends with Barbara Rush. None of you remembers Barbara Rush, a gorgeous actress, and we became friends through my being Robert Osborne's neighbor. So it's a movie that came along, during the Vietnam War. It was an anti-war film about the Korean War, and I just loved it. It was good to see it. I think if I saw it every day, it would lose its effect, but that's true of any great film.
Absolutely. Talking about like B actresses and B movies, do you have a B movie that is your that's one I wish would have been an A movie or...
Well, in other words, a guilty pleasure?
A guilty pleasure.
I'll have a couple.
Okay.
One is called Lost Continent with Cesar Romero. They land on an island. It's 50 years before Jurassic Park. And these little claymation stop-action dinosaurs. And it's with a little character actor named Sid Melton who says, "Tyranno who?" And they're all going to get eaten by them. It was a black and white film. And Vera Cruz is a guilty pleasure western of mine with Gary Cooper and Burt Lancaster, who I think had 75 teeth in his mouth for that movie. He gets shot, and he says, "No, cut that bullet out." And he cuts the blood, no pain, no blood, none of that. And it was with Katie Hirata was in the movie, and a young actor, Ernest Borgnine, right before Marty, right before Bad Day at Black Rock, and a young actor named Charles Buczynski, Charles Bronson.
Really?
Minor part, yeah. Jack Elam, and it's about Maximilian and a Gatling gun, and I love that film as a kid. So that's a guilty. I have a lot of guilty pleasures, but those are two that come to mind.
Any favorite, B actors or actresses that you met or have a story about?
I've met 900 actors, and known 900. My dad, he said, shamelessly slipping into a plug for his new book.
Yes.
My dad was a Broadway columnist, and he wrote 1,000 words a day, 6 days a week for 40 years, from 1934 to 1974. No gossip. That was Winchell. No eye to the keyhole. Walter Winchell created the genre of the Broadway column. And Cindy Adams is the only one left who really does a column in New York. But in 1934, my father, the New York Post, which was a rival, it was a big, very liberal paper back then, and they were looking for a columnist with an alliterative name to compete with Walter Winchell. And my father, Leonard Sucher, he was a practicing attorney. He'd been contributing to other columnists, poems, little quips and whatever, and he came in with a scrapbook full of these things, and he beat out 500 aspirants for a 6-week trial. And he lost 15 pounds in the first week and a half because it was so grueling, and he would write 12,478 columns of anecdotes of people. And what he would do is he'd get up in the middle of the day, and he would go to Sardi's, which is still the theater restaurant in New York, 21, which is still there, Toots Shore, which was the big sports restaurant, all those afternoon places. And hey, Lenny, come here. If he saw another columnist, he'd leave because he wanted his stories to be exclusive. There are 2 types of stories he printed. Either a news item, Humphrey Bogart is going to be in a new book. That's a dead story now. But if Marlene Dietrich told him something that she did, that's an anecdote.
Yes. That's
a timeless thing. So in 2011, I wrote the first of 2 books, and I realized there are too many stories, too many people need a second book. Each chapter is a different person. He had anecdotes on athletes, actors, gangsters, politicians, judges, painters. He said, all right, he never used the word celebrity. And I grew up in a house with, my dad's best friend was Orson Welles, to give it a Sedona connection. Yes. Beatrice is a lifelong friend of mine who lives here in Sedona. And I grew up in a house where John Steinbeck came and Streisand, and I remember Edward G. Robbins. When I was 5, one night there was a party in there, and so it was like 1 in the morning, and I woke up and I walked into the living room to see what all the commotion was, and I didn't know who any of these people were, except Joe DiMaggio in the corner, cowering in fear, because he was the lightweight, I learned later, so to speak. And I walked past the guest, and it was a hush. I barely remember this, but I was told. And I said, Mr. DiMaggio, you're the best guest here. And he never forgot it. And 35 years later at an old-timers game, he called me over. Maybe he'd seen me on TV, can you imagine? And he said, would you still say that? And I said, sure, Joe. And I learned in the interim that the people I so cavalierly went past in my pajamas in our living room were Ernest Hemingway, Adlai Stevenson, who, when I finished second in my class for the run for the presidency, sent me a telegram saying it's not so bad. Edward G. Robinson, Fred Astaire, Comden and Green, and I forget who else. None of them could hit a curveball, but Joe D could. And I'm not even a Yankee fan, but it was a different world back then. I don't think you could write my dad's column today, because there's Netflix, flat screen TV, people moving to LA. They don't congregate in those kind of places as much as they did. There are some, but not nearly as many. Then he'd go out, he'd write his column and turn it in at 6 o'clock. Then he'd come home and he'd go out again at night to 13 more places. And when he got home at 1 o'clock in the morning for 3 hours, no faxes, no internet, no word processor, he'd be like this with the phone, dictating word for word the stories he had gotten at night that were too urgent not to wait a day. And so take out this one and put in this, carbon paper and all that. And Sunday nights, a young Western Union messenger would come to our house and take the column down to the Post. For a year, it was a young boy named Edward Albee, which is why in his masterpiece, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, the quarreling couple learns of the death of their imaginary child via a Western Union messenger. And my mother always had told me that story, and I saw him a few years ago, and I said, "Is that story true? Was that really you?" He said, "Yes, and your mother never tipped me." That's how I knew it was true. So it was an amazing life, and you know, my father had 4 sons, and one of my brothers was an off-Broadway producer, and I've been a movie critic for 40 years on TV and radio and in print. And my son Ben now is, well, he has 3 jobs. He's into movie criticism. He was a correspondent on E! And then on Extra, and now he's an ESPN radio anchor in LA. And he is Derek Jeter has a website called the Players Tribune, where professional athletes talk directly to the public, and Ben is their chief correspondent. So he goes all around the country to the homes of athletes, and you know, Paul Pierce, the basketball player, has a bowling alley in his living room, and Ben bowled with him, and you know, another player collects snakes. So Howard, the guy on I think the Mavericks, he has snakes. So Ben went to his house and you know and had snakes all over, and he goes as the chief correspondent. He also does the red carpet for the Oscars every year, and every year it seems to be a different place. This year he's doing it for IMDb AOL. So it's the 3rd generation of using the word Lion's Den. So it was, and it's chronicled. This book, for example, shameful plug, chapters on.
Show the cover.
This is called "What a Time It Was: Leonard Lyons and the Golden Age of New York Nightclubs." But it's not just about New York. There's a chapter on Omar Bradley, on Eisenhower, on Roosevelt. The longest chapter in the book is on FDR, which is appropriate and typical. What, for example, nobody knew in 1940 that Roosevelt was going to run for a 3rd term. Only he knew. How did the world know? One night, and this is a story my dad printed. One night they had as entertainment some Italian pickpocket. 3 times he picked the president's watch off his wrist. And the 3rd time FDR held it up and said, 3 times, I like the sound of that. That's how they knew that he would run for 3rd term.